What does the literature tell us about graduate students and the issues they face writing theses and dissertations and working with sources? Let's take a look. Dr. Christine Bruce in 1994 investigated graduate student conceptions of the literature review section of their dissertations. What she found was that incoming doctoral graduate students had divergent views of what a literature review is and why it is important. She found that many seemed to have what she called impoverished conceptions of what a literature review is. Many saw it as merely a list of previous research results, or just a passive report or survey of the knowledge base, rather than as a critical and selective intellectual argument. Why can the literature review be such a problem for some graduate students? Sharon Perry investigated how graduate students were initiated into the process of doing research and writing scholarly work during their years in graduate school. Each discipline has its norms: theoretical, methodological, rhetorical. These norms govern what questions are worth asking, the methods you should use to investigate those questions, and the type of arguments that you can make within that discipline. They can govern everything right down to how to structure a research article or a literature review. Perry argues that little is known about how graduate students master the norms that govern source use in academic writing. She argues that these norms are often not explicitly taught. They fall into the category of tacit or unspoken knowledge. Graduate students are often just expected to pick this knowledge up on their own through their interactions with other graduate students and with their advisors. And this can create a real problem when you come to graduate school because these norms are invisible. There are other issues that affect graduate students' abilities to complete a satisfactory literature review that does not plagiarize their sources. Boot and Bile argue that there may be a lack of clear and consistent criteria for the literature review, which again echoes Perry's argument that many graduate students are just expected to pick this knowledge up on their own. In addition, Boot and Bile also speculate that incoming graduate students may not have had any writing instruction since their freshman year, which may leave them unable to meet the higher expectations of the thesis or dissertation writing project. Krishnan and Kathpalia coined the phrase shadowing to describe how non-native speaking undergraduate seniors may try to hide behind factual information and source quotes to cover the fact that they are not sure what they are actually trying to say in their writing. And finally, Abbasi, Akbari, and Graves argue that non-native speaking graduate students' lack of skill in working effectively and ethically with source texts can come from a failure to develop an authorial presence. In other words, if you don't actively engage with your sources as an author with something to say, critiquing them as much as using them, in other words, having a presence as an author, it will be much easier for you to cobble together verbatim bits of your sources to do your talking for you. What can we say about how graduate students tend to handle source text? Let's look at some studies that have asked graduate students about their copying habits. In a survey of students done at a Midwestern university, Wajda Johnson et al. Found that 55.1% of graduate students surveyed admitted changing the wording slightly from the original source. 16.6% of graduate students surveyed admitted copying word for word without quotations. A similar survey on academic misconduct was done by Brockelman and Pollack in 2006 at Ohio University. In that survey, 6.3% of graduate students who responded admitted to copying sentences at least once in the previous year. Interestingly enough, at that same university, that very same year, Ohio University, a plagiarism scandal broke out that became very public. A master's student at the Russ College of Engineering discovered that a number of engineering master's theses in the library's collection contained material plagiarized from other theses. This incident ended up calling into question 55 graduate theses. As a result, one student's master's degree was revoked, and numerous theses had to be rewritten. Incidentally, this scandal was written about in the Chronicle of Higher Education, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times, as well as being discussed on National Public Radio. One of the students involved, who is now an engineering professor at another university, stated in the Wall Street Journal article that We had no idea of what to put on a thesis when we took material from someone else's work. I have conducted a couple of research projects that have looked at the incidence of copying in engineering master's theses and doctoral dissertations. From a random sample of 150 engineering theses and dissertations completed in 2009 at universities across the country, I found that master's engineering students copied significantly more verbatim words in a row and more of their literature reviews than doctoral students. So in this table, you can see that 34% of the engineering master's theses I looked at had copied sections longer than 60 words in a row, compared to only 19% of the doctoral dissertations. And 21% of the engineering master's students had copied more than 25% of their literature review sections verbatim from their sources, compared to 7% of the doctoral students. I would like to emphasize here that it is not just graduate students who copy sources in their academic or scholarly work. In 1998, an engineering professor plagiarized grant applications to the National Science Foundation by copying a text and figure without attribution. That same year, a faculty advisor plagiarized from his graduate students' master's theses in an NSF proposal. In 1999, a chemistry professor plagiarized from another NSF award into his own proposal. Incidents like this happen every year, and the National Science Foundation often reports on them in its semi-annual report to Congress.